Hey folks, welcome to Narratives. Narratives is a podcast exploring the ways in which the world is better than in the past, the ways it is worse, and the paths towards a better, more definite vision of the future. I'm your host, Will Jarvis, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you enjoy it. You can find show notes, transcripts, and videos at narrativespodcast.com. Well, Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. I really appreciate it. I want to get started. Can you give us a brief bio and some of the big ideas you're interested in?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit from Motion Hall Focus, since that's what takes up a lot of my time and attention. So Motion Hall's co-founder and CEO. We do deal enablement for biopharma licensing, mergers, and acquisitions. And so I'm sure we'll get to talk about that a little bit more. I think the big vision there is that we're trying to move life sciences innovation faster from patent to patient. So we're trying to impact the entire life sciences tech transfer cycle. And my background, usually what people want to know when we're talking about Motion Hall is how I got into it. So I started coding when I was 5, not because I was brilliant, but because my dad was really nerdy. So he's like, all right, Rachel, take this computer. Here's a book of basic. This is what we do. So I grew up coding first, then getting online early, running web-based businesses as a teenager. Everybody said, Rachel, go to Silicon Valley. And the joke is on me because eventually I did. But at the time I was like, if everybody says this, then I better do something else. So I went and did philosophy and computational neuroscience and really fell in love with the life sciences. Then through that work, I started to watch some of my professors try to spin out biotechnology companies and mobilize their innovation out to the market where it can help people. And I thought, gosh, why is this so hard? Why are they so stuck? And why is somebody who's just really the world expert trying to mobilize their life's work, dealing with all this complexity too, just to try to move what they've discovered to where people can use it. So that's a bit about my background and why I do what I do. And then other big interests, I think if we go beyond Motion Hall, I'm always interested in, solving big coordination problems. I'm interested in progress and impact. And I think a lot about how we can apply what we've learned at Motion Hall and tech transfer there to energy and climate.
Excellent. Well, I really love that vision. And, I've really been interested in life sciences innovation just as a topic. I like to read about it. I'm no expert at all, but it does seem like, the price to get a drug to market has just been expanding rapidly. There's this there's this law. It's like anti-Moore's law. It's like, it's Eroom's law, and it's that the prices of drugs are, it's doubling every so often, every couple of years. It's getting more expensive and more expensive. And I remember the internal rate of return for pharmaceutical companies, I think, went negative like last year or a couple of years ago. I don't know the exact figures, but it seems like what's the big stumbling block? It seems like we have a lot of innovation. We have CRISPR. Maybe the scientists are less productive than they were 50 years ago, and maybe even significantly so. But we're still spending a lot more money directed toward these scientists. We're getting some amount of innovation, but why are we having where's the stumbling block in tech transfer from science to actually in vivo in patients? What's the big place? Is it with the universities, with the IP protections? Is it matching scientists with companies? What does that look like?
Sure. And there's probably, there's a few different ways to answer that one. I'll answer it the one that I best said. I think sometimes I think a lot about, where do people tend to go? They tend to go, if we just dumped more money on the universities and basic research, would that help? And the answer is, yeah, probably, right? That's not the one I'm most excited about. If we just waived all the regulation, would that help? I'm less excited about that too, although, I'm sure there's some good arguments in favor. The place that I think about the most is at these transfer points. Let me give you some context here. The average biotechnology innovation changes hands 4 times before it ever reaches a commercial patient, right? So in addition to that, depending on how you count it, $1.6 billion, $2.6 billion per drug, 11 to 12 years to get it to the first commercial patient. It's trading hands multiple times. So maybe that looks like transfer out of the university, then it goes to a little biotech. That biotech sends it to another biotech. That biotech sends it to maybe a pharma in Japan, and then another company has to pick it up for the rest of the world, right? So that's a lot of transfer just to get something to its first commercial patients. And at all of those transfer points, there's a tremendous amount of complexity and coordination that has to happen both between the biotech that owns the IP rights and the people who work there and understand it, and the company that's going to pick it up and finance the next stage of development and distribution. And so I want to make sure that I say that in a way that's impactful enough. It's very, very hard for human beings to get their heads around everything that needs to happen to go through that IP transfer point successfully, right? So you've got huge teams of scientists at a potential pharma company that's going to pick up that IP. You've got the business teams, you've got the legal teams on both sides of the fence, and everyone has to agree and see the opportunity in a somewhat similar way just to get it off the ground. And so if I can kind of extend that one a little bit more, from my vantage point, I talk to companies with really incredible biotech innovation every day of my life. It doesn't appear to me that there's a shortage of innovation and opportunity out there. What there is a lot of trouble understanding where the real opportunities are, matching that up with capital, right? So capital allocation problem, and then coordinating people to actually distribute the best of that science out to people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. So it's not, you don't think it's like a low hanging fruit problem where it's just gotten too hard to, find new ideas or anything like that. It's actually just like that we've got this really Byzantine tech transfer process, which prevents us from getting real innovations like into people.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't even call it Byzantine. I think some of the things work. It's just maybe the complexity around what it takes to coordinate humans there is bigger than it was, right? So let me see. I definitely can't believe that there's a shortage of innovation. I talk to such amazing companies all the time, and they're everywhere, right? So we've got companies that we work with, incredible innovation coming out of Chile, who are now able to access the world, right? And all these platform technologies that spin out incredible numbers of drug candidates. The complexity is coordinating, understanding on the other side. So something we talk about a lot is, it's great to be novel, because if you've done something novel and it's a breakthrough, you can change the world. It's also bad to be novel because nobody can understand it, right? And so it's really, really hard to dig inside these companies that you absolutely need to license your IP to get your product, right? Because the costs are high, because you need all that infrastructure to distribute drugs successfully to patients. You have to go through the transfer point, which means you have to arrange for the people at that company to see your science, believe that it's real. It's similar to like a late stage VC investing problem, right? But I'd say the complexity has exploded because you're not just evaluating business fundamentals, technology, and people, but maybe some very, very complex new science, and you've got 100 opportunities to look at that per day. Does that kind of make sense? Where there's a complexity point there?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's all these crazy like knowledge transfer problems about how do you decide what's what. I'm curious, is how much of this problem is just the fact that there we don't see scientist founders. I'm not sure why. Like in IT,
Yeah.
Founders can have a founder led company. You can take it all the way from nothing to IPO the whole way through. This is very common. It's rare that it doesn't happen in other ways, relatively rare. But you very rarely see like scientist led companies go all the way through. And I wonder if on the back end that means they don't get much liquidity. They don't have much ability to invest in companies they know they will be successful. They've got special expertise in that front because they've actually been through the whole process. So these people don't really exist. There aren't many of them. And then you don't have these kind of special capital allocators that can signal to the market like, this is a great idea, you need to invest here. I don't know. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, I think about that and problems like that a lot, right? So, I think biotech and solving problems in the life sciences, building a company in the life sciences, not always, but usually pretty different from building a tech company. It's much more rare to get somebody who's a world expert in their particular slice of novel science who can also lead a company and become a fabulous capital allocator. They're out there, but it's much more rare. Could there be more of them? I think there could be, right? So then what do we need to do to make it so that there could be more sort of empowered scientific founders that are leading companies and maybe helping nurture the next round of companies, particularly around they're going to focus around their areas of scientific expertise, right? Because there is that complexity there. What was I thinking about when I was thinking about this problem? Another really big difference for scientific founders and for biotech companies that are trying to build is just the enormous cost of drug development, right? And then they've got so on like a tech company, again, with some exceptions, there's no easy route to revenue,
Right.
right? So if you wanted to get leverage on your investors, which a lot of us who are building software companies do, so that we have more choice, then you build revenue and you get, Paul Graham's ramen profitability or something like that. But you can't do that if you're a biotech investor. You absolutely need that capital in large amounts of it just to get the company moving. And so that means investors really have biotech founders over a barrel, right? And it's very hard for them to generate leverage. And so it's much more common for them to take more of the company, I've never seen a biotech company structure with super founder shares where the founders have control, right? Usually the VCs get control of the company very quickly. And then I think the attitudes and norms there are really different, sometimes for the better of the company, sometimes for worse. So it's common to meet teams out there that will find IP they like, back it, and then fire the founder scientist and the rest of the team and replace them, right? So something that was much more common in tech, I think, before Paul Graham kind of came in and introduced some new norms, right? And so what would a healthy set of norms look like for biotech? I think about that all the time. I wonder if, we'll be in a position to socialize some of them from our vantage point at Motion Hall. And I'm sure there's other people who are thinking very hard about how to do that too.
Absolutely. No, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it also, it's notable. I remember this weird anecdote, but in college, like I was looking at wide range of startups, doing some project at the business school, and I was looking through things, and I noticed that most of the biotech startups were led by MBA founders who were clearly like, they hadn't had the idea originally, right? And so this was like very, very distinct from most successful IT companies. That, it does happen, right? You'll have like an MBA founder, but it's much more rare. And so it's very notable, right? Like that just is kind of a signal.
And it kind of runs all the way up the chain, right?
Right.
And I think it's harder, right? If that scientist founder has to be so focused on being the world expert in their science, right? Then it's really hard for them to cross that bridge. They have to trust. There's a whole world of, I think, not to pick too much on MBAs, but often somebody with lower conviction who's looking to make a buck maybe has a different sense of mission around the company, right? And so things get choked up. Like they get choked up there, right? And I don't know how I think you'd have to change the whole culture, maybe create a lot more transparency around opportunities, which is something we're trying to do.
Definitely.
To drive that down. Yeah.
Well, and maybe like you said earlier, like it's even worse. The MBA is indicative that oftentimes these people were installed because by VCs, because we need this like the business person to come in and like actually run things, and I don't know, and they don't have that specific vision of like what the future will be like. It's just kind of like a job at the end of the day.
Maybe can I say something nicer about some of the business people in the life sciences
please
too?
Do.
Because I think you do see that structure, but I think particularly at the biotech company level, we do see a lot of really good partnerships between a scientific leader who has respect for a business teammate that they've selected. That person probably has like a PhD in molecular biochemistry as well. Maybe they've also got a law degree or an MBA. And then there is an alignment in that everyone understands like this is their life's work.
Exactly.
There's a lot of capital, they can make money here, but also, they're very focused on their patients. I think sometimes the job is just hard, and there's maybe there's another opportunity, too little light shone on the people who are doing heroic work trying to mobilize new medical innovations to patients, right? And doing that with a lot of mission orientation.
Absolutely. No, yeah, definitely. And I think two in the box leadership works really well, like a business person, technical person together. That often can be quite helpful, kind of dividing up those duties in a robust manner.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you see like this kind of situation changing just at the macro level? Interest rates are very, very low. This has pushed a ton of capital into the VC market. It's up to like $650 billion last year. And most of that is just people searching for yield, right? This is like a longer, like 800-year trend of interest rates, like intersecting, like getting lower and lower and lower. Maybe we're running out of ideas. We're not sure why, but interest rates seem to be like, they will probably be lower in the future than they are now. This is my guess. Do you think like that will encourage more capital into the markets? And as a result, scientist founders will get better terms in the future because if there's more capital, there's more competition for that capital. And maybe they don't have like the ramen profitability kind of leverage, but at least like there's more competition for capital, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess my answer is maybe on a long enough time horizon, Probably. But short term, what do I think? Short term, I think it really looks like a mess
Gotcha.
right now. A lot of capital being misallocated. The companies don't have the talent and structures to mobilize it properly.
Right.
Usually when there's waves like this, there's a big, people get their fingers burned and then they recoil. And, my short-term bet would be that we're going to go through that pattern before we get to this kind of golden age of biotech. I think we have to get there. There's so many hands working on it right now and everybody understands the importance. And the COVID pandemic shone a lot of light on that. But if I look at where the money is going right now, the way it's being used, the lack of talent in the biotech space as well, right? So there's scientific talent. I think the innovation around that is actually pretty good, if you asked me. But the talent with I think also that mission orientation and drive is in such high demand, right? To actually successfully mobilize things and coordinate a team to do that. And that's where a lot of these companies that have been capitalized recently are falling down because they're hiring quickly like a blitzscaling startup does, but they're a biotech. And it just takes more time and attention and a steadier hand to actually move things successfully. So I think a lot of them are in trouble.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. And these things can go backwards. Like we saw that with the dot-com bubble. It took a whole generation to for that to filter out. And these things can take a long time to work out. So I'm curious, I know you probably can't go into specifics, but what I'm guessing is that what you do at Motion Hall is you try and match these inputs together better to get more, more successful innovations on the back end. So you've got, early stage scientists, you've got all this capital, and there's all the contract research organizations in between, and all these different steps you have to do. It's a very complex process, and if you could coordinate this better, you could get more outcomes. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so I think what do we talk about? Like failure rates in drug development, right? So biology is hard. I would say maybe only 1 in 3,000 drugs that get started actually makes it to a commercial patient, right? So could you drive down everything else that introduces unnecessary risk in that process? And, in terms of emotional, so we don't work with CROs. We don't do any sort of matching or driving down complexity there. We're all about this matching problem, right? So if you have to take your IP, transfer it to another part of, to another group, whether that's another biotech or a pharma, which you do, because that's how you're going to, for almost every biotech company, that's how they're going to bring revenue into the company to fuel the next round of development in their pipeline, right? And then pharma has to buy to fuel what's in their commercial and marketed portfolio. And so if you have to make these transfers, then not just matching them. So we'll do the matching. Sometimes people say we're like almost like OkCupid for biotech and pharma companies, right? So sort of a logical matching, but then also providing all that context and best practice around it to help people coordinate to understand the match. Because it's one thing to say, hey, look, BioNTech's, mRNA vaccine Pfizer is a 90% match for what you want to do now that there's a pandemic, right? And then there's a lot of information that's needed. Well, do I really believe that that's true, right? How do I know that it's true? How do we see that this is the right partnership on both sides of the fence? And that's where I think we're trying to shine a lot of light. And then we do bring huge amounts of data to bear and workflows around that so that it's easier for people to see each other. What's a good analogy for that? You could almost imagine we're merging together something like OkCupid with the Bloomberg terminal, right? So yeah, if that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like, so traditionally, excuse me, I just don't know much about the space, but traditionally, do people that are trying to buy this IP, I'm assuming, is it M&A people at large pharmaceutical companies? Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, let's talk about the structure, because I think, right, you have your corporate development that's doing M&A, and maybe they have some different focuses than, so in the life sciences, you've got these really structured groups on both sides of the fence to deal with these transactions because they really are lifeblood of the industry. So it's different from other verticals, right? So pharmas will have their business development and licensing group, right? And you can find them maybe at Pfizer, it's a 70-person group or something like that. And their job is to search and evaluate, right? So to look for IP that they can license in that aligns with whatever strategic priorities are top of mind for them. There's scientists around that playing a role. And on the biotech company side, you've got both your heads of corporate development who are looking at the M&A components, buy or sell. And then you've got your chief business officer who's looking at licensing an IP, maybe from a university, and then licensing IP out. So there's there's departments and job functions that all they do is think about these transaction pieces for IP on both sides of the fence.
Gotcha. So it's matching those two together. It's making that easier.
It's matching those two together. and then a little bit of breaking it up, right? So you might think differently about buying a whole company than just licensing IP, even though you get total rights to that piece of science if you license in the IP.
Gotcha. And traditionally, is it just kind of like a super manual process where maybe like Sally down here at Duke, and she's got a great idea, and like maybe there's like these like very rough networks of people, and maybe you're on Google trying to figure these things out. Like I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's been through like several iterations over the last so many decades, right? So if you go back far enough, it was really very who you know, very geographically locked, lots of networks of trust. And that makes sense because there wasn't a lot of information available. I think particularly in the 90s, a lot of databases were developed that tried to scrape clinical trials and get manual input on the world of biopharma, and those have helped, right? And so I think before Motion Hall, the best practice was a lot of poring over those databases and Googling, plus using networks of trust, and then still a lot of geographical locking and hoping you bump into the right person at a conference, and spray and pray strategies to try to match with the right person. And then I think some of those dynamics that you see in venture come into play too, right? So, people do move based on fear of, greed and fear of missing out, right? With these products. And I think what we're trying to facilitate with, now a global customer base and a fair amount of success is, can we drive down that geographical locking by making this really transparent, showing people exactly where the fits are and what they need to know to actually start to build a successful relationship with the company on the other side of a transaction. What else has been great there? The pandemic did do a few things that are very good for the biopharma industry. And one of them is that instead of having to meet at conferences and shake hands, people get on Zoom now with their video on. And that's been really, really good for companies that are, for example, in Chile, building something absolutely tremendous for cancer, or in Australia or Korea, right? So it means that they've got more windows plus the tools to connect to the right people and move some of that globally. Whereas in the past, I think people literally walked around, Sandhill Road and South Bay and tried to meet the right person. So I've got a cute story. So one of our board members, Rod Ferguson, led the Rituxan deal for Genentech. And so Rituxan is one of the most important cancer drugs, from the last decade and more on the market. It's available to patients everywhere. And that's more than $1 billion for Genentech every year. I think it was past 2 last time I looked. And so literally Rod found IDEC and the Rituxan molecule because they were down the road from him where he lived. And then he was able to license that for what he says is a song, about $7 million, right? And people really didn't fully understand the potential of that drug at the time. And yet it's been absolutely incredible, right? So that's how it has been done. Wouldn't the world be much better if you could see globally where all that innovation is? It was much more transparent if people could connect and have the right conversations faster, right? So that's what we're trying to facilitate.
Got it. No, I really love that. I'm curious. It's such a big problem, right? Because if traditionally people are literally like just this incredibly ad hoc manner, and you can in some way kind of much more systematize these things, you can match much more inputs together, get a lot more outputs on the back end.
Also realized I got the Rituxan numbers really wrong. It's more like 10 billion. Yeah,
that's all right. Even more.
Someone's gonna fact check me.
Absolutely. No, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm curious. When you're looking for a successful drug candidate, and this might not be exactly in the area you guys are working in, but you're looking for a successful drug candidate like Rituxan. Generally, it seems like people have taken a very kind of statistical approach. It's like we're just gonna get a bunch of like compounds and try to find them or something like that. Whereas it seems like the best way to do it, and the way most drugs have been discovered, I read this kind of popular science book on it, so I don't know much about this, but it seems like most of the way these drugs have been discovered is because people find something that does something like a big effect size. So this is how we found like some of the first cancer drugs and all these different like antibiotics and things like that. It was just like, wow, like this is doing something. It's doing like a big thing, and then you can apply it in different areas. So I don't know, like, are there any like heuristics you look for when trying to evaluate candidates like molecules?
I mean, let's see. There's going to be a lot of answers that I think what do I say? Some of that just falls outside of my expertise, right? And it's going to be so
Gotcha. Right.
different depending on different companies. We look at much more boring heuristics, but I think they're worth noting. So, when we're working with companies, we'll say, look, you're going to know your science best. So apply your best scientific lens on top of all the candidates that you have, right? And sometimes we're working with companies that have maybe 700 candidates that they're looking at, or how many permutations of clinical trials programs that they could run. So pick out the ones that are the strongest scientifically, and then let's apply a business lens over top of that, right? So if you know that you have to match, and this is a constraint on the market, right? If you know you have to match with a company that can help you distribute that, then before you dump all this money in here, and maybe somebody's got a solution to this is not ideal, but if you know you have to match, then let's see who's out there that you can even match with, right? Because the way that you're going to get more capital to fuel the next program that you want to develop is by finding that partner who's going to put capital back into your company and take it through the next step, right? And so one of the places that companies fall down is optimizing scientifically, but then not thinking about the fact that they're going to have to partner. And if you build something that the rest of the biopharma market doesn't want to cooperate with you on, or that's very hard to get them to cooperate with you on, then that innovation just sits. And I think a real shame there is, right, the patent ticker is going, right? And so becomes less attractive the longer it sits, and the longer you have to fight to get somebody to pick it up, right? Then the innovation's really at risk.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. It sounds like the red-haired boy problem they talk about in like IT venture investing. Have you ever heard of this?
I don't know the red-haired boy problem. Tell me this.
Yeah, so it's a Yudkowsky kind of idea where, if you're an early stage investor and later stage investors just refuse, like they don't like red-haired, founders for whatever reason, or purple hair, like you name like some characteristic. Even if like the business is a really good idea, if they can't get capital in later stages because people aren't interested in some aspect of the company, like we don't invest in like marketplaces, like if common knowledge is marketplaces are a bad idea, even if it's a good idea to invest in the company, if they can't raise money later, you're much worse off.
This is exactly how biopharma works, right? And so right now, like Alzheimer's is super unpopular. Diabetes is super unpopular, right? I've seen amazing drugs in the diabetes space that have a real value proposition to just like cure diabetes, right? Amazing. Right. It's almost impossible to get people to look at it. When I'm talking to those teams, I'm like, look, okay, like I do believe if you have something that good, you can find buyers and partners, but we're going into heroic sales here, right? So, I'd love to work with you on heroic sales. And then, are they up for that type of task, right? When the market's really, really rough. So it's absolutely like that. And it goes through trends and fads, just like the tech scene does. So right now, a lot of capital is going into Web3. Yeah. Maybe if you're not Web3, certain investors don't want to look at you. Something we hear from biotech companies is everybody's interested in immuno-oncology right now. Nobody wants to look at a chemotherapeutic. It's viewed as last generation, but look at the lives that I'm saving, right? And so then we say, okay, how do we get into figuring out how to develop, right? So you get into heroic sales, right? How do you develop those, fit points that are out there, generate understanding? Again, I always think there's a way, but it gets harder and harder and harder, right? Just like I think it does in tech. And it may be some ways even harder because if you're trying to raise capital and you're the red-haired boy, you can probably find somebody who doesn't hold that bias and get that done. If you're a biotech company, you have to convince full committees of people, right? So there's just a lot more stakeholders to arrange to have move. And so that just really exacerbates the scope of the problem and how much heroic efforting it takes to get it over the fence. I will give you something that I think is really neat that's also been possible with some of the new transparency in the space. It's something we're working on, but there's other ways to look at this too. The big pharmas, right, like your Pfizers, have the biggest committees, right? And they have a lot of trouble coordinating amongst themselves, right? So, and because science is complex and the business is complex, adding more headcount money doesn't actually help you solve that coordination and complexity problems. In some ways, it makes it worse. There's all these little medium and specialty pharmas out there that are maybe not beholden to the same rules, that have smaller committees or fewer decision makers. They've been traditionally very hard to find, but it's easier to match them now and find them now. And so sometimes there's a way to get something moving through one of them, right? Provided that the biotech and that pharma can come to an agreement. And the other things like maybe the board blocks it because it's not a big enough deal, right? So, yeah.
That's good. No, I mean that's a really good development, right? It's like smaller players who can actually like get more conviction because they don't convince like large groups of people internally
Yeah,
to buy into like good ideas can really help.
absolutely.
I'm curious. It almost sounds like the yeah, like the venture model where like partners can make this is not all venture firms, but some venture firms have the model where partners can make their own decisions and like we just kind of like outsource that all. It seems like important to do that, especially in biopharma, because like trends can really influence like whether or not you invest in if it's just unpopular, like it's almost like the problem I see where football coaches never go for it on fourth down, even though they always should, because like if you still lose, you lose bigger, and that looks worse, right?
Sure.
And nobody ever got fired for hiring a Harvard grad, even if they're like a bad fit.
That's right.
Very similar problem.
That's right. No, that kind of fear is a really big problem in the pharmas, right? And nobody wants to be the person who did like, this multi-billion-dollar Stemcentrx deal and it fails, right? Like
right.
People yell and scream inside the big companies, both about missing things and about buying a dud. There's a lot of capital that goes into it and the stakes are high, right? So pharma companies know that if they don't renew their pipeline, right, drugs go off patent, they're going to go generic, which is good for all of us, right? The way the machine works is good for all of us, but it means they have to renew and have another big moneymaker in there before their portfolio goes off patent. Otherwise, they're looking at layoffs and their stock price goes down. And so the tension and the pain there is really real for them. And I'm sympathetic to that. There's different comp structures too that try to push these people to make deals on time. And then, a lot of folks in buy-side licensing or company M&A, right? And sometimes, just for context, sometimes M&A in the biotech and pharma space just looks like another straightforward transfer of IP,
Gotcha.
Right? So it's less moving parts, right? We're buying the IP so that this company can move it. You'll hear a lot of those people say that the hardest negotiation they have to go through isn't with the biotech company, it's with their internal stakeholders, right? So you could have even a few really motivated champions for a piece of science and still have them spending a tremendous amount of time on that. I think a really amazing example of that. So again, Rod Ferguson, who's on our board, has done two sort of oral histories with us. One is on how he led the purchase of Rituxan and what that was like for Genentech. The other he does is talking about the auction of Herceptin, which is another really important molecule. And what's fascinating about that is what he needed to do as a BD person at Genentech under Roche to auction that. And he had the world's CEOs from pharma companies coming to buy this with the notion that Roche was out of the deal. And the way that worked is, so Roche didn't believe in Herceptin. And if you read the story, what you can see is only once everybody else wants it, does Roche come back in and say, actually, we have a first right on this, and now we're going to exercise it late in the auction phase. So those stories are amazing because things still work that way. Even though those stories are dated now, those human realities and coordination realities are still how the drug industry works and struggles to understand things.
Absolutely. And it sounds like just like everybody, they're just highly mimetic, and it's like, and that drives a lot of activity. They and a lot of their decisions, right? You just talked about Roche, like, they didn't want it until everybody wants it, and then
until everybody else wanted it. Yeah. No, I mean, so yeah, very similar in terms of greed and fear of missing out driving a lot of decisioning. And then if you've got a team on the other side who really knows how to amplify those dynamics, then that can help them get a deal done. And it can also contribute to maybe not the wisest allocation of tech capital, right? So absolutely. A lot of challenges there. Yeah.
It's really fascinating talking to you. I've had some of my suspicions that it probably, works like this in drug development, but I don't know. But the ideal state world would just be like, well, we all sit down and objectively evaluate what are the best molecules, and then we move them through the process. And instead, it's just like it's incredible how it actually works.
Wouldn't that be nice? Economy. I mean, I wonder. If you look way into the future, right? Maybe there is some sort of, with enough data capture and a big exchange, right? It does seem like it would be possible to get line of sight on where the best innovations are, where the best matches are, move them, or the whole structure changes, right? But what do I tell people? I think I'll be old, right. Quite old by the time that happens. I'd love to help. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right now, it's still very people, right? Right now, it's really about helping people navigate these dynamics. I think that's the most powerful place to make an impact.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, how did you first identify this problem as a problem we're solving? And that, like, and was there an aha moment where you were like, "Wow, this is an area where a robust solution could really help things," or was it just kind of like a gradual process? And the second question going off that is, how sure were you that it would work?
Uh, yeah, those are both great questions. I'd love to say I could tell right away, but it was a gradual.
It's a gradual process with a lot of horror, I think is what I would say. I think everybody wants to believe that the world works better than it does. And it's poorly understood, right? So like we talked about earlier, people tend to have this perception that all the innovation happens in the universities and that the pharma's just take it and charge a lot of money for it. And that's really not true, right? There's all these biotechs in the middle who are doing a tremendous amount of work. And then, right, all these kind of transaction points that we've talked about. How did I get into it? So I have that 3-point background that I talked about, right? So I grew up coding and running my own web-based businesses. I did neuroscience. I watched my professor spin out. I started to work with, because I saw that problem, I started to work with the CEOs and boards of biotech spin out companies. And at first I thought I was going to buy, I was like, these are data problems, right? There's information problems here. I'm just going to buy the software that must exist to help solve these problems. And then I did find these kind of 90s era databases. And it's a really classic tech story, right? Why is everything so broken? Let me call some people up. It was pretty easy to find people who are willing to talk to me. It's like, what do you like about the databases? What do you not? Oh, they're full of duplication errors. And they don't have most of the information they need. And they're manually curated and focused on public companies. And, I guess because I had that tech background, I was like, okay, there's room to do a lot more here. But even then, I think it's been a multi-year journey, just appreciating the full scope of the complexity, how inefficient and opaque the market is. It's truly horrifying. And to amplify that, the young people who join my team or people who just haven't worked close to these problems in the past, as they're orienting with Motion Hall, you can almost see them like, it can't work this way. It can't be this bad. No, it's this bad. Like, we're sitting on top of, we see some of the world's most amazing innovations for COVID, for cancer, for preventing future pandemics, for diabetes. And then we look at the teams and we look at the challenges they have, and this is it, right? Like, it's a really big, messy problem area that suffers from the information complexity, the opacity of the market, human limitations, lack of talent. It's a mess. My take is it's a mess.
Definitely. No, that makes sense. And this question I always like to ask founders, because I'm always trying to level set this. Elon says he thought there was like a 10% chance he would be successful with SpaceX. Did you, I don't know, did you assign odds to it? Did you, I
still ask myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, what do I think? Because the vision would be not just to solve the places that we're playing now, but how much can we do to move things from patent to patient more efficiently in a way that's better for people and patients and companies and economies. What have I thought? I did think getting into this that it was a lower risk prospect than some of the other things I might build, right? Because tech, life sciences, a bit of business. I had a lot to learn, but that's an interesting 3-point background. And I am very tenacious and I'm good at eating complexity. And I was like, this is a really ugly baby, right? This problem it's ugly. Nobody wants to love it. In fact, nobody else does love it. I took a good look. I still don't think anybody else loves this problem but me. And so, that gives you time to become a real expert managing this really important unloved baby, right? And they're all over the place. And so those things made me feel like if I pursued the problem with a strong methodology and followed strong playbooks, we would be successful. And so that's worked, right? Like, we're now a global company. The technology works. People told me you'd never be able to do it. We're helping companies all over the world. The grander vision, right? How far we can take this. I think I wish I could say I have 100% conviction we'll get there, but there's still open questions for me. How far can we really take this? And it probably depends in part on, how many willing hands want to join and help me push the vision who are truly exceptional. But for the pieces that we've cracked already, they are done. It's just scale now, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I love it. Do you think generally people should be more confident about, should people, I guess at the meta level, be more confident generally about their ability, like if they plan well and they have a unique insight to kind of do something that kind of gives them an outside return? Does that make sense?
Yeah. People should. Yeah, I think so. There's always this kind of funny conversation happening about, well, is starting a startup actually risky, right, in the tech scene? And, for some people, the answer is yes. You've got to know yourself and think about the opportunity and who you are and what you bring to the table. But I think there are more people for whom it's not as risky as it appears, right? You plan, you certainly have to grind and put in the time, but the outsized return is there. The networking opportunities and learning opportunities are fabulous. Maybe it takes a little bit of bravery, right? So that classic, is bravery in shorter supply than genius, perhaps. More people should seriously consider it. And then it's about being ready to think long term. I guess the other piece is, what's the good advice? The good advice is think about what business you're uniquely suited to build that nobody else is building, right? I did that. Think about what you can do on 10 years, not just 1 year. So people tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and be very impatient and think much more poorly about what's possible if they dedicate themselves to something for 10 years, which, things compound. So if you're willing to compound over a decade, you can accomplish a tremendous amount and really change many, many lives, not just your own. I don't know if I'm saying anything particularly novel here, but I do wish more people would try. And I think, what's really attractive about going to these ugly baby problems, they kind of talk about that as, you're not just trying to catch a trend or a wave. You're looking at a real problem that's on love, that exists out in the world today. They're everywhere, especially if you're willing to go places that aren't as hot or trendy, right? So maybe less fun, maybe where you're going to be more alone, but boundaries of, government or legal complexity deep inside companies, right? Finding things that have really high leverage that are just being neglected because no one has the time to chase them, with the right tenacity and methodology. I think it's, I want to say easy, but it's very predictable that you can build a business there, right? If you just stick with it. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, I think it's really good. And if I had to summarize it, the message I think I get from you, and this is from like third party perspective, and I don't know you that well, but I would say is, you should spend a lot of time thinking critically about, like how you can do it and plan and like have a robust process for doing that. But once you've done a lot of critical thinking and you have a good shot, you shouldn't be afraid to be confident that you can go out there and actually make something happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think if you put in that time and thought, it's easy to become convicted, right? Right. It didn't take me long to be like, okay, this is really it. I've done my research. I understand the path to get to revenue. I understand the path to finance. And I just have to, be ready to do what it takes, right? So what's an interesting one? For an enterprise sale like what we do, it can take up to 4 years to really crack a predictable sales cycle.
Yeah.
So you might be looking at 4 years of unpredictable sales and difficulty cracking that sales cycle. And it did take us a lot of time to crack the sales cycle. But if you know that, you budget accordingly, you plan methodologically, right? Then you're not going to be discouraged. And that's a huge accomplishment when you do it. And then, right, compound, right?
Absolutely. And then nobody can really catch you.
That's what I think.
That's great. Yeah, there's nothing like enterprise sales cycles. They're quite bears. Very cool. What do you mind if we do a quick round of overrated or underrated in our last couple of minutes?
Sure, let's do it.
Absolutely. So Halifax, Nova Scotia, overrated or underrated?
I knew you were going to ask me this one. It's funny. I usually don't talk about Halifax because most Americans don't know what it is, right? So I'll be like, I'm from the East Coast of Canada. They're like Toronto? And I say, yeah,
like Toronto. Sure.
We'll just go with that. No, let's move on. Halifax is my hometown. It's a university town. What do I really love about Halifax still? We hire a lot in Halifax. I think the talent that comes out of the universities there is underrated. And I'll share that with people, even though it might give me more competition for that talent. I think incredibly talented, hungry people, huge intake of immigrants. So Canada's really, really good at opening the door to talented immigrants. A lot of them land in Halifax. Great. I'd love to meet them. And then they go through the universities and they're excellent. So that's wonderful about Halifax. Beautiful to visit in the summer too. So I'll give Halifax underrated.
That's great. Discourses on Livy, overrated or underrated?
Yeah. Sounds really cute. Get me in trouble. I think it's underrated and maybe vehemently so, right? So Machiavelli gets a pretty bad rap. I'm a little nervous talking about it, so he's maybe going to judge me. But I think if you read Discourses on Livy, what did I really appreciate about that book? I think I am with the camp that sees Machiavelli as a patriot who's really trying to figure out what's right for the people in his nation. Some of the things that he talks about in Discourses on Livy digs into sort of long-standing truths of how people think and organize and can be moved, right? You can recognize and extract those truths without having to, then go with a medieval prescription of how to apply those truths, right? But if you want to solve grand global challenges, coordination problems, work with large groups of people, then it really behooves you to understand how people work both as individuals and groups, right? So there's a saying that great CEOs become masters of people. And certainly my experience on this journey is that is very necessary. And so underrated and doesn't deserve the bad rap that it gets, but certainly you need to read it with a modern eye, right? And think about what's true to extract there and what doesn't. What can you leave behind? Because it is a very old book.
Absolutely. I might mispronounce this. Aduminicab? The Alzheimer's drug?
You know what? I think you did great.
Okay.
I think you did great. What do I want to say about the Alzheimer's drug? I think that one's been overrated. I think the consensus view is now that it's been overrated. What's been really sad is that with that one moving, there was a lot of hope for Alzheimer's companies. So I mentioned earlier that it's been an unpopular, it's like a red-haired boy. Nobody wants to work with Alzheimer's. And yet there are fabulous interventions and treatments out there that just need some financing or someone to pick them up and take them the rest of the way. And there was a lot of hope with that drug that the industry would start to change its mind and attitudes would change. It'd be easier to move them through. But
kind of had the opposite.
Alzheimer's companies are doing, they're doing heroic sales, and the winds have really blown in the opposite direction for them. So I've got companies that I work with right now where we're talking about how that's impacting the way that they're perceived and how we use some of the tools that we have to overcome that challenge.
Awesome. Birch Russel, overrated or underrated?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. I like Birch Russell. I don't know what most people think about Birch Russell. Underrated, overrated. What will I tell you about Birch Russell? I just really enjoyed his autobiography, which is, I assume, where you picked this one up. I think there's something really nice about how human and raw he is about his life's journey in that particular book. And for those who are listening who haven't read it, who maybe do enjoy Birch Russell, one of the things that's very cool there, beyond him talking about growing up, going through university, some of the big transitions in his life that I think are mirrored in transitions that you can go through today, is that he spends the end of his life writing letters with all these, kind of leading intellectuals of his time, right? So he's writing letters to Wittgenstein and Einstein, and it's really quite interesting to see those exchanges. And I think there are echoes of that in what the internet's allowed a lot more people to find their tribe, right? Maybe that's Birch Russell finding his tribe over time. Internet's a lot of us find our tribe, right? Maybe it's something mirrored in, the way that we talk to each other about progress, the progress studies community or other communities. And anyway, that's what I liked about Birch Russell's autobiography.
I really love that. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today on a Saturday. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you? Where should we send them?
Where should we send them? I think the best place for people who found me here to find me is, could I give it my personal email address?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Don't come to my company website. You'll go through a whole round of triage and get treated like a company. So don't do that. But certainly welcome to find me on Facebook. I think that's a good place to connect with folks affiliated with the Progress community. And then if you find me on Medium, I've got a page about myself where I think you got both Discourses on Livy and Birch Russell. And my email is written out at the bottom. So maybe we won't say it for the transcript, but Rachel at mindvehicles.com. Hopefully we can break that up so it doesn't get scraped. But if you want to drop me a note there, I'd love to hear from people. And maybe one request is, if you're listening to this and you think you can apply some of what I've talked about or learned at Motion Hall to the energy sector, boy, would I love to meet somebody who's interested in mobilizing tech transfer more efficiently in the energy and climate change sector. I think a lot of the things that we've learned do transfer, but I can't take it on in addition to life sciences at this time. So that's somebody I'd love to meet.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Will. This is really fun.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Bismarck Analysis, for the support. Bismarck Analysis creates the Bismarck Brief, a newsletter about intelligence-grade analysis of key industries, organizations, and live players. You can subscribe to Bismarck Brief at brief.bismarckanalysis.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Narratives.